Hello, Eagles fans, and welcome inside the film room here on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. I'm Fran Duffy, and joined to debut this segment here on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, NFL Film Senior Producer Greg Cosell. And Greg, we're going to do things a little bit differently this time. We're going to look at traits at each position along the NFL draft and really get a sense of what translates well to the NFL. And we're going to start at a position that Eagles fans are very, very excited about, the offensive line. What is one trait, and you watch the NFL all year round, what is the one trait that kind of sets it apart? And obviously we're talking about multiple positions here.
Yeah.
What is it, we'll start at the tackle spot, that you really need to be able to do if you're going to succeed in the NFL?
Well, I think if you're talking about tackle, obviously you're starting with pass protection. So what does that mean? What that means when you're facing quality NFL pass rushers, because that's the big difference between college and the NFL, is the quality of pass rusher that you're going to have to face as a tackle. And I think when that happens, you're not always going to look pretty. There's very few guys who can consistently look pretty playing the left tackle position. Joe Thomas comes to mind. He's one of those guys that always looks very comfortable. But I think what you have to be able to do is what we say redirect and recover, because you're going to get beat initially at times, whether it's to the outside, whether you get beat to the inside. You're going to have to be able to redirect and move your feet laterally quickly. Because how many times, Fran, have we seen players when we're studying the college game and they just don't do that very well at all? And we think to ourselves, okay, so now if they're playing against the quality pass rushers in this league, how often do they have to do that? Very often. You're going to have to be able to redirect with your feet really quickly, stay on balance, have body control, not lunge. How many times watching film do we see college offensive tackles bend at the waist and lunge forward and basically lean into pass rushers? You can't pass protect that way in the NFL.
Well, one player and you mentioned the word pretty, and perhaps no offensive tackle is as pretty as Laremy Tunsil. And you mentioned Joe Thomas, probably the best since Joe Thomas, maybe even before that. Tell us about Laremy Tunsil. He's probably the number one pick in this draft. What does he bring to the table?
Well, you know, it's funny. We talk pretty, but normally we don't use the word quick twitch when describing offensive linemen. But that actually came to mind for me watching Laremy Tunsil. But I think the other thing, besides the really quick feet, was the balance. Because that's the other thing I was talking about when guys lunge and bend and lean, is Laremy Tunsil does not do that. His posture, his stature, his knee bend. You hear the term a lot, natural knee bender, because if your knees are bent and you're comfortable like that, you tend not to bend at the waist. He plays with such great balance and body control that rarely does he struggle versus counter moves, because he's always under control from a balance standpoint. And again, now you get into whether that can be coached or whether that's just a DNA gift. But Laremy Tunsil plays with tremendous balance and body control, and you combine that with his really fluid, quick feet, and you've got a prototypical NFL left tackle.
And Tunsil is one of those players that can roll out of bed and he can pass protect in the NFL. I think another player that fits that bill is Ronnie Stanley. Another guy, physical gifts are off the charts. Talk about good feet and the ability to protect the edge. Talk about Ronnie Stanley and what he brings to the NFL.
And it gets to another trait, which I think there are some who might have some concerns about this trait, because it's not always, you're not always able to be pretty when you're a pass protector. I think you start getting into competitiveness, because sometimes you can still redirect and react even if you're not looking pretty doing it, because you're so competitive and tenacious and you battle. And I think Stanley checks all the boxes physically, but I think there are some who will look at Ronnie Stanley and think maybe he just lacks a little bit of that competitive toughness to really be able to battle when he has to face counter moves. I think to the Clemson game, it was the one game, and I'm sure you watched it, where he really struggled. Shaq Lawson got him a number of times with counter moves to the inside. And Stanley, it's not because he doesn't have quick feet, but he just didn't seem to react the way you need to react versus counter moves, which he's going to see a ton of in the NFL.
Well, it's interesting, too, when you juxtapose Ronnie Stanley to Jack Conklin from Michigan State. And one player has great feet, the physical gifts are there, but maybe some questions about the competitive toughness. Not the question with Jack Conklin, a competitively tough player, gets after it in the run game. not as quick feet and pass protection. Talk about Jack Conklin.
Yeah, and he's the perfect player that speaks to the balance between competitive toughness and tenacity on one side and the physical traits part on the other, because as you said, Jack Conklin's physical traits are not what you ideally want at the left tackle position. Now, some may see him as a right tackle, some may see him as a guard. I personally think he'd be an outstanding guard. I don't know how teams see him. But then it also comes down to the kind of team you're on. This is when we get into the transition from the college environment to the NFL environment. Conklin, to me, is best as what we call a short setter, where he can engage quickly. He's not on an island left tackle where he can sort of vertical set, play with a lot of space, have to react to the athleticism of good pass rushers. He needs to be a short setter, get right on the pass rusher.
Is there an offensive lineman past those three that could potentially play tackle? Jason Spriggs,
yes.
Cody Whitehair, any of these other tackles, potential tackle guard players that stand out to you after those top three?
Well, as a tackle, Jason Spriggs to me is a fascinating prospect because he's very athletic. And I think that's what teams ideally look for at the left tackle position. In today's NFL, your left tackle has to be a pass protector first and a run blocker second. Jason Spriggs, and I've made this comparison before, he reminded me very much of Nate Solder coming out of Colorado, and he was the 17th player chosen in the first round that year by New England and has had a nice career as an NFL left tackle. Spriggs, similar guy. Both Solder and Spriggs went to college as tight ends, moved to left tackle. Spriggs has the athleticism and movement you look for at the left tackle position. It's interesting you mentioned Cody Whitehair. To me, he's almost this year's version of Zach Martin. I think he's a guy who, as a left tackle, you look at him, you see the toughness, you see the competitiveness. He's country strong. I wouldn't say he's a natural knee bender. I think he plays a little straight up as a pass protector. I think he'll move right inside to guard. I think he could probably start from day one at offensive guard in the NFL.
And the last question I have for you, and really just talking about the interior of this offensive line, what is the trait that really kind of sets apart the tackles from the guards and centers? Is that intelligence and mental processing? Things are happening a little bit quicker inside. As a player like Ryan Kelly, does he stand out in that realm? Jack Cowan, a lot of really talented centers and guards in this class. How do they stack up against each other?
Well, you talk about traits. I think one of the things we haven't talked about, which we need to, is intelligence, and it's football intelligence, because what you get in the NFL, which you don't get anywhere near as much in college, are pressure concepts. All kinds of different pressure concepts. And when you're inside playing on the offensive line, you are working together with other players, more so than perhaps at tackle, where very often you're just blocking one-on-one on the outside. But you have to have a real good feel for pressure, for stunts, for how to work with the buddy next to you. That is so critical for centers and guards in the NFL. But you mentioned Ryan Kelly. I think he's the best center prospect in this draft. He could certainly play guard as well with his height. He's about 6'5". But Ryan Kelly, to me, is as good an interior line prospect as there is in this draft.
Well, Greg Cosell, I really appreciate the time. And stay tuned for more here on Film Room on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we're going to be describing all the traits you need to learn for every single position leading up to the NFL draft. For Greg Cosell, I'm Fran Duffy. We'll see you next time.